Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. You might acknowledge that, or recognize that today is not actually Saturday. But sometimes, socialism comes at us when we least expect it. And as we move into the glorious month of Red May, starting tomorrow, we're going to be seeing a lot more socialism midweek and at odd times. And that kind of kicks off today. And to be quite honest, I'm just a little disappointed with Haymarket Books for not scheduling this on May Day. That was a misstep on their part. But in about 7 minutes' time, we are going to be dropping in on our old friends, Haymarket Books. You can watch the live stream here, and I'll put that link in the chat. Just in case anyone is not yet blocked from their chat and you guys want to go over and chat good questions, because in about 5 minutes time, 7 minutes time, we are going to be watching a live stream from the largest socialist book publisher in the United States, Haymarket Books. They are re-releasing, apparently, the Communist Manifesto, and they're going to be doing a live stream about it starting at 5 o'clock. And they're going to be talking about how it relates to our current political climate, which, especially given the college protests of all the little commies running around, could prove to actually be relevant. Join Phil, Sabrina, and Vanessa as they discuss the continued relevance of the Communist Manifesto in today's political landscape. Since it was first written in 1848, the Communist Manifesto has been translated into more languages than any other modern text, all across the world in countless places and idioms. It has been debated, shared, bandished, invoked, banned, burned, and even declared dead. But in an era of escalating political, economic, health, and environmental crisis, Marx and Engels' fierce indictment of capitalism is more relevant than ever. Some might say that the only thing the left cares about is abolishing capitalism. And their manifesto remains required reading from the classroom to the picket line. So that's going to be coming up in about 5 minutes, guys. And as I did mention, Red May, our favorite revolutionary socialist out of Seattle. Hi, Philip. Hi, Sean, the most handsome of all socialists. Red May is finally getting their act together. Red May is finally starting to announce a schedule. I haven't had a chance to go into this in depth yet because I've been busy today, but it looks like Red May is starting to make a comeback. Do we have any speakers that we recognize right off the bat? Let's see. I don't really feel like I recognize any of these people. We're going to be introduced. This is going to be great. We're going to be introduced to a whole new band of socialists. Yeah, I don't recognize any of these people, at least not at first glance. Maybe if they started talking, I would start to recognize them. So that's going to be fun and exciting to get to. But guys, before we get into it, I have a couple other announcements. Number one, do make sure you head over to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. This is my content hub on the internet. This is where you can sign up for free email updates. You can also support the work I'm doing for $8 a month, $80 a year. And I will have some updates concerning the college protests later today. And again, I apologize for not getting these out earlier. Honestly, Tuesdays are a very busy day for me. I basically get up and I eat a bagel and I am off on an endless array of meetings and obligations until I hit this stream. And so I just haven't had time to do it. But the students at Columbia took over a building last night. They decolonized a building. It was very stunning and brave of them. And so we're definitely going to be talking about that. And so I was also up late last night. I had a cheddar and jalapeno bagel with garlic butter and then melted goat cheese. And it was delicious. All right. And I make no apologies, but we got a lot to talk about there. But guys, I have really special news. Can I share you? Like, I don't normally get excited about being blocked by people on Twitter, but I may have just gotten the ultimate block on Twitter. Do you guys want to see who I got blocked by on Twitter before we get started with the Communist Manifesto? I got blocked by Jordan Peterson. I got blocked by Jordan Peterson. What did I do? Do you ask? To get blocked by Jordan Peterson? Well, earlier today, someone tweeted at Jordan Peterson and they asked, Jordan, when are you going to have a conversation with Nick Fuentes? And Jordan Peterson retweeted it and he said, when hell freezes over. And then I retweeted a screenshot of that, like retweeting the original tweet. And I said, stunning and brave Jordan Peterson is afraid of having a conversation with a 25-year-old. And that was enough for Jordan Peterson to block me on Twitter, which you really have to give him. Like, that's like, Jordan, that's like some soy boy level beta male cuck shit, man. Like, I never anticipated that the man who claims responsibility for inspiring millions of young men around the world to be the very best man they could be would be so afraid of a 25-year-old that literally streams his show out of his mom's basement on a green screen. Jordan Peterson is so afraid of Nick Fuentes that even the mere mention of maybe you should talk to Nick Fuentes. I actually think that would have been a fascinating conversation. True, like real talk, that would have been fascinating. But no, Jordan Peterson's a pussy. I'm not upset about this. Anyway, winning. But guys, we got to get right into it because the journey into the Communist Manifesto is about to start. They even have their music playing and everything. So let me pull this up and we will enjoy it. And again, guys, per usual, I just want to say, if you're going to go over to their chat, I want us to be represented well, okay? I don't want any shit posting. I don't want any belligerence. Don't do that in my name. If you're going to ask questions, I expect them to be good questions. I expect them to be thoughtful questions. I don't want to see any of this. If you're communist, then how come you're participating in capitalism? Because the Communist Manifesto literally gives them permission to do that, okay? So I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to hear any of, when are you going to move to a communist country? No. We are more advanced than this. We are better than this. So ask good questions, ask pointed questions, ask questions that are going to get them to say the quiet part out loud, please. And let's just enjoy the show. It's getting started in about 15 seconds.
How we can ultimately dismantle any of it if we don't stick to a intensely radical politics. You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are two ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket
an extra
at
level
haymarketbooks.org.
I mean, your icon should
And secondly,
speak volumes.
by joining the Haymarket Book Club. The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video now, and share it with as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's live stream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We are moderating the chat, but we cannot guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. People who violate these guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we are able. This event will have live closed captions. Instructions for accessing the captions will be posted in the chat. We should have time for Q&A, so please post your questions in the YouTube chat window, and we'll get to those later in the program. Thanks for joining us today. Our event will begin shortly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us for Haymarket Books Live tonight. My name is Carlos Enriquez, and I'm part of the programming and events team at Haymarket Books. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, conversation and celebration of the launch of the second edition of the Communist Manifesto, a roadmap to history's most important document. Here it is so you all can see it. I'm honored to welcome our special guests tonight who are with us. With us are Phil Gasper. Phil is the editor of the Communist Manifesto, a roadmap to history's most important political document, and is on the editorial board of New Politics. He is professor emeritus of philosophy at Notre Dame du Nemours University in California, and currently lives in Madison, Wisconsin. We also have Sabrina Fernandez. Sabrina is a Brazilian sociologist and political economist, and the head of research at the Alameda Institute. She holds a PhD from Carleton University and was formerly a postdoctoral fellow in the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and with the Center of Advanced Latin American Studies. She is an eco-socialist activist, a member of the Eco-Social Pact of the South, and her research is focused on transition, Latin America, and internationalism. She's also the editor of the special editions of the Communist Manifesto and the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, published in Portuguese by Paz et Tierra. And we also have Vanessa Wills. Vanessa is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the George Washington University. She's a founding editor of Spectre Journal, biannual journal of Marxist theory, strategy, and analysis. Her monograph, Marxist Ethical Vision, is forthcoming in June and available for pre-order from Oxford University Press. So we're going to have Phil kick us off tonight. So whenever you're ready, Phil.
Thanks so much, Carlos, and thanks to Sabrina and Vanessa for joining this conversation. The Communist Manifesto was written over 175 years ago in 1848. So the obvious question is, why should it still be relevant today? An article in the Guardian newspaper a few years ago said that the Communist Manifesto is currently having a moment because its ideas have a habit of popping up in times of economic and social crisis. The article points out that huge numbers of young people are turning their backs on capitalism. Now, that sentiment has been strong since at least the 2008 financial crisis, and it's grown stronger as inequality has increased, as the far right has emerged as a serious threat, and as the climate crisis has become an existential emergency. The manifesto is about why a revolution to get rid of capitalism is both necessary and possible, and it's about the basic principles of an alternative to capitalism. And that's true, even though the word capitalism actually doesn't appear in the manifesto itself. Marx and Engels use the expression bourgeois society.
Private property.
What the manifesto provides us is an account of where capitalism came from and how it works, and an argument for the centrality of class for understanding the world and, more importantly, for changing it. Now, when I was an undergraduate a long time ago, back in the 1970s, the most common criticism of Marxism was that it was outdated. Marx may have described 19th century capitalism accurately, but contemporary capitalism, we were told, was different. Economic crises were a thing of the past, living standards were rising for everyone, and capital and labor were partners, not enemies. That was the world of the post-war boom, which lasted from the late 1940s to the mid-1970s. Since that time, the US and world economies have experienced a series of sharp crises. Real wages in the US are lower today than they were in 1973. Inequality has increased dramatically, and we've experienced over 40 years of a one-sided class war from the top. Today, the world looks more and more like the one that Marx and Engels were describing in 1848, a point that even many opponents of Marxism acknowledge. It's because Marx and Engels lived at a time when modern capitalism was young that they were able to analyze the system in a way that captured its essential features and its core dynamic. So the manifesto charts the way in which capitalism has shattered narrow horizons and produced technological marvels, but it also describes capitalism as a system that is increasingly running out of control. Capitalism concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a small minority. It creates huge pools of poverty. It turns life into a daily grind that prevents most people from fulfilling their potential. And it experiences frequent and enormously wasteful economic crises. Capitalism encourages greed, competition, and aggression. It degrades human relations so that they are frequently based, as the manifesto notes, on little more than naked self-interest and callous cash payment.
That includes parental rights.
Marx and Engels argue that capitalism is a system based on a ceaseless drive to expand, in which highly destructive economic crises are unavoidable and which has thus become fundamentally irrational. To quote the manifesto, modern bourgeois society, with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld whom he has called up by his spells. And in a world threatened by pollution, global warming, and the destruction of ecosystems as the result of uncontrolled capitalist growth, I think this image has special resonance for us today. So capitalist society has raised production to the point where everybody could be provided with a decent life, but the conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. Each successive crisis can be overcome by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises. Private ownership and the anarchy of marketplace competition are no longer compatible with large-scale economic production integrated at the social and global levels. Well, the manifesto is above all a revolutionary call to action, an explanation not only of what is wrong with society, but how it can be transformed to create an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And central to this strategy for change is its claim that in the modern working class, the proletariat, capitalism has produced its own gravediggers. Marx and Engels argue that capitalism has created a group of people with both the capacity and the interest to fight for the overthrow of the existing system and the emancipation of all humanity. The power of the working class is based on the fact that capitalism socializes the labor process, bringing workers together in large urban centers and in large-scale units and chains of production. At the same time, the pressures of economic life tend to push workers together to fight back against their exploitation. And because of their key economic position, workers have the collective power to bring production to a halt by going on strike.
That's what unions are.
For long periods of time, many workers may
All
be satisfied
unions are
with their lot
socialist.
under capitalism, or at least willing to put up with it. But Marx and Engels understood that this state of affairs couldn't last forever. The chaotic, turbulent, unplanned development of capitalist economies eventually throws whole societies into turmoil and turns even the most modest of working class demands into a challenge to the whole system. The process is not a smooth one. The ruling class attempts to weaken the working class by exacerbating national, racial, and other differences. But such divisions can be fought and overcome as capitalism continues to intensify the class struggle.
Because they're global.
And because of their strategic economic position, workers, whether blue collar or white collar, industrial or service, have the power to become masters of the productive forces of society by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. That's another quote, of course, from the manifesto. Now, in retrospect, the manifesto has an overly optimistic conception of how quickly these processes would work themselves out. But since the mid-19th century, capitalism has repeatedly shown that it cannot avoid periodic crises, and that these crises may bring the barbarism of modern warfare in their wake. At the same time, the working class has grown ever larger on a global scale, increasing its potential power to shut down the economy and to threaten the existence of the ruling class. Will there be new upsurges in struggle in the future? According to a major study issued in 2021, we are currently in a historical period of protest. The authors, and I'm going to quote from a Washington Post article about this study, looked at demonstrations between 2006 and 2020 and found that the number of protest movements around the world had more than tripled in less than 15 years.
Oh, you don't say. It's like they're destabilizing
Looking closely at
everything.
more than 900 protest movements or episodes across 101 countries and territories, the authors came to the conclusion that we are living through a period of history like the years around 1848, 1917, or 1968, when large numbers of people rebelled against the way things were, demanding change.
Because they're trying to destabilize
But the report
system.
also notes that there are a smaller number of protests with right-wing politics focused on denying the rights of others.
Because conservatives are
racial
lazy.
or national minorities. An important reminder that in times of crisis, the right can grow as well as the left, and there is no inevitable path to working class victory. At the center of the manifesto's vision is the idea of working class self-emancipation. As Engels puts it, our notion from the very beginning was that the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. Working class self-activity and self-organization is both the key to successful revolution and to the new form of society such a revolution would bring about. But unlike the early utopian socialists, Marx and Engels don't offer a detailed blueprint for the future. They are not interested in painting what they call fantastic pictures of future society. Utopian dreams are unconnected with the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. And it's primarily with analyzing these material conditions that Marx and Engels concern themselves. But the analysis of these conditions does allow them to formulate in general terms the principles on which a socialist society would be based. The first and vital step is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle of democracy.
Dictatorship of the proletariat.
Democratic working class control of society is in both the economic and political realms, is the defining feature of the manifesto's conception of socialism. Without real democracy, there can be no socialism. In their preface to
Without
the
real
German
democracy,
edition
there
of the
can be no
Manifesto
socialism.
of 1872,
That's because
they point
socialism
to the
means
example of the
democracy, and
Paris
democracy
Commune of
means socialism.
1871, where the proletariat for the first time held political power for 2 whole months, as a concrete historical example of what they had in mind. In the context of workers' democracy, the new society could advance towards its ultimate goals, the elimination of private ownership of the economy and production for the market, and the final abolition of all class divisions. Marx and Engels are clear that such dramatic economic and social changes, unlike the seizure of political power, can only come about by degrees. But through such measures as nationalization of land, banks, and large-scale industry, combined with heavy taxation of the wealthy, the new society could gradually eliminate production based on market competition and replace it with workers' control of production and democratic planning designed to meet people's needs and allow them to develop as free individuals. There's one further aspect of the manifesto's vision that is important. Capitalism is an international system. For this reason, it's impossible for a single region to break free from capitalist relations of production on its own, at least not for any significant period of time. The only way in which a workers' revolution can ultimately survive is if it spreads to other countries. But precisely because the world economy is more and more characterized by universal interdependence of nations and improved means of communication that place workers of different locations in contact with one another. And that's Marx and Engels writing in 1848. So communication has certainly improved a lot more since then. The prospects for international solidarity are arguably better today than at any earlier time. The manifesto's final call for workers of the world to unite is not just an abstract moral slogan, it's an essential precondition for the transformation of society. Capitalist crisis is inevitable, but socialist revolution is not. Capitalism may yet bring about the common ruin of the contending classes mentioned at the beginning of the manifesto. If we want to see socialism and not barbarism, then the most advanced and resolute section of the working class movement has to rebuild infrastructures of resistance and dissent, organizations and structures that don't disappear when movements go into a lull, and that can push the struggle forward when it reemerges.
When you guys shitpost, you ruin the opportunity to ask good questions, okay?
Time is not on our side. But if you accept the manifesto's analysis, that's what we have to do to win the change that we need.
Thank you so much, Phil. Serena, would you mind going next?
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all those words. It's very nice to be here at this Haymarket event. I was actually remembering right now that last time I talked to Phil was probably when he edited one of my articles for New Politics in 2021 when I was working on this issue of the Communist Manifesto in Brazil. So it's nice to connect these kind of things and also to meet Vanessa today. I'm thinking what I would like to Phil gave such a great introduction, and also he covered a lot of the topics in terms of the relevance of the manifesto today. I think what I want to focus on is the experience of seeing people, especially youth, reach out to the Communist Manifesto nowadays, especially when living under authoritarian rule. And which is the experience that we had in Brazil in the past few years, when we actually saw a lot of young people come in and purchase the manifesto or look it up online, try to understand what's behind the anti-communist wave that came with the Bolsonaro government in Brazil. And we know it's associated with the far-right movements all over the place, in the sense that even though I understand that a lot of the people who make some sort of opposition to these far-right governments or these far-right organizations that are coming along, they're popping up everywhere. So it's not just Latin America, it's in the US, it's in Europe, it's in South Asia. Even if they don't understand themselves as communists, or even they're not inclined to see themselves as communists, there's some curiosity because the anti-communist discourse is so strong. So sometimes people are trying to figure out, so is this true? What is happening here? And we've had quite a large task trying to demystify some of the things that people hear about it. So this idea of communism being associated with poverty, with authoritarian rule, or communism being associated with different types of control or not being able to own things. So this is something that we still hear a lot around here, and we know this is also present in other places, this idea that, well, if it's communism, you can't have things, and people would be worried about this kind of stuff. So having to demystify even the most basic things means that we had to go back to the text a lot. We could go back to a lot of things that Marx and Engels said, and we could think of other big figures in Marxist history, but the Communist Manifesto was always so easy because of the way that it is written, the way that it lays out explanations around class relations, and the way that Marx and Engels themselves are trying to demystify certain concepts and certain perceptions in the society that they were living in, especially because of the context of 1848, of the uprisings in
What do you think you understand?
How things are popping up in different contexts, but in the same region. We need to always remind ourselves
because
that
when people say they understand this, they very rarely
the
do.
Principles of communism before this, so there was already a text that was laying some of the foundations here, but the way that they wrote the manifesto was in an agitative perspective. So actually trying to draw people in, actually trying to reach the working class, respecting the working class as a revolutionary movement. This is their main point against utopian socialism. After all, is the fact that there's a subject here, and the subject is not only capable of understanding this call, but this call cannot come into fruition without the action by the subject. So this is where you have full force. You have power coming in. So you actually
Hang on.
context.
She's not saying anything relevant. When it comes to the discussion of personal versus private property, you have to reject the distinction. This is why I asked what you think they mean. When they say when they say private property, they mean your home, your land, your apartment rentals, your business, your intellectual property, your parental rights, and your individual liberties. Anytime they bring up the discussion of personal versus private property, they are trying to confuse you to make you think that you will not lose anything. It doesn't matter if you lose a cell phone. It doesn't matter if you lose a camera. It doesn't matter if you lose a bookshelf. That none of that matters. If you lose your parental rights, your ability to own a home and your ability to own land and all the other stuff, that is all that matters. Okay? So what I'm going to recommend is that people stop accepting the premise of this distinction. Stop engaging in the argument. Every single time socialists bring up, we don't want to eliminate personal property, we just want to eliminate private property. They're lying to you to try to get you to believe something that is not true. They are gaslighting you, and you need to just reject the premise. Don't ever say, oh, I understand what you mean. No, reject the fucking premise. What do you mean by private property? And if they don't say your home, your land, your business, your intellectual property, your apartment rentals, your parental rights, and your individual liberties, they're lying. And nothing other than that matters.
And sometimes people are not really understanding where they fit into that. What kind of proletariat you are when you're the one driving the car, but you're getting, you're making a living through the ad. So we have this effort of trying to explain these changes in capitalist society today. And some people might think, well, maybe the Communist Manifesto is not that useful anymore because they were talking about, the bourgeois society. So you have the bourgeoisie and the proletarians. But I actually completely disagree with that idea. We have new forms of exploitation, and because capitalism is getting so creative with the use of different tools to control and to exploit society, this is why it's really important to go back to the roots to understand this. There's a place in the manifesto where Marx and Engels say that like capitalism is about the past dominating the present, and communism is about the present dominating the past. So it is about us learning, whereas capitalism will create innovation by keeping us locked in terms of exploitation, like not being allowed to dream, not being allowed to fulfill our destiny through concrete utopias. So not in a teleological sense, but in the sense that we have a task at hand here. There are things we have to do. So going back to the Communist Manifesto, using it as a pedagogical instrument is actually very powerful nowadays. We should not give in to the temptation of just saying that because they are inclined towards anti-communism, we should actually shy away from it and try to look cool in other ways and not really embracing the fact that the best way to fight anti-communism is by explaining communism better, is by reaching out, is about politicizing around it and contextualizing in the very rich history of struggles that we have. And these struggles are struggles around national liberation movements, they're racial struggles, they're gender struggles. So even things that are not directly present in the Communist Manifesto because they're not part of the 1848 context here, they're very useful because we are building on top of it, and we have new authors and other people showing up. So it shows the diversity of subjects that we have here, and this is a legacy that we need to ensure in the type of workers' organizations that we have today. From the internationalist sense, it means that the climate crisis, this horizon of ecological catastrophe that we're facing, and the way Marxist theory helps us elucidate all the different points, the complexity around it. It also shows that we have this need of understanding possible contradictions that may show up in transition efforts, in the way that we are organizing to fight climate change as well. And I think this is something that is always important to highlight, because sometimes the debates around fighting climate change or creating a
Jason,
big
if you're
transition
watching me,
program, or
I'm
like
really
investing
unhappy
in
with the amount of
jobs, or
shit
even
posting I'm seeing in their
using
chat.
terms around just transition for transitioning workers in an industry, sometimes we're not taking into account where these plans are still reinforcing center-periphery relations.
It's not
they're
helpful.
still sometimes like promoting the improvement of lives, even though marginal, because it's still under capitalism, but the improvement of lives of workers in the center at the expense of workers on the periphery, workers that perhaps might be involved in extractivism, or nowadays what we're seeing as patterns around green colonialism, because green capitalism is presenting itself as the answer nowadays. So trying to reinforce the myth of the end of history. So there's nothing else that you can do. You have to retain a green capitalist perspective, and find that if we are actually going to move forward in the sense of not only defeating capitalism, but defeating the horizon of an ecological catastrophe. So ensuring that we remain on this planet, that we can build emancipatory futures in a sustainable planet. The way for us to do that is for actually to like try to connect these struggles on a very material basis. So it's not just about solidarity statements. It's not just about standing together in the sense of saying something that's happening in another place is also important. These workers are standing up for themselves. We should do the same, but also trying to find the linkages here. And I also think that in this special moment that we are right now, a very difficult moment in the world scenario, what we're learning in the past few months is that it's not even enough to just say free Palestine or to just say we're standing together and like we are defending the rights of Palestinian people. The biggest chance that we have is when we're actually engaging with blockages against capital, showing that the capitalist interest behind colonization of Palestine, showing that workers everywhere should be digging to what's happening with their pension funds. The students right now like promoting this very powerful movement for divestment. So showing these capitalist linkages.
Yeah, this is live,
really
so I have no
important so we
control
can
over
actually
this.
put an end to some of these capital flows. And then we can go back to like something that's in the manifesto, which is this idea that under capitalism you work for accumulation, and under communism you work for existence. So this idea behind existence, fruition, having a good life is something that connects us all. And I think there's a lot of opportunities.
That's
in
what
this
environmental
moment,
justice
even though
is.
there are like authoritarian speeches,
That's what environmental equity is.
actions taking place right now, going back to the essence of what we find in the Communist Manifesto, shows us a pathway for strategy as well. So a strategy that's connecting the struggles on this material level, where we're finding that something that is happening in the US or in Brazil or in Palestine or in South Africa, they require action more than statements. And this action
Joseph, fuck you.
inevitably is going to point us to the roots of capitalism, and it's going to point us to where profit is being made. And then we're going to have to figure out the ways to join hands here.
Guys,
and
do not be
put an
like
end to
Jason in
these,
the chat.
flows of
Honest to
capital
God,
accumulation.
do not be like Jason in their chat ever. Like, I'm sorry.
Great, thank
the
you for
shitposting
that.
is not helpful, and it actually lessens the
I'm
possibility of
going
them
to do
giving
two
us anything
things.
useful.
I want to talk about the content of the manifesto and why it's important today. But I also want to talk specifically about this, about why we need this book. So the Haymarket edition,
I'm pretty sure we've seen her before. She teaches at GW.
Has been, to my mind, the absolute best English language edition of the manifesto, bar none. There's this, whatever would be second is quite a distant second. So we need the content and the ideas of the manifesto itself for all of the reasons that Phil and Sabrina have given us. But we also need our hands held a little bit, right? And our students need their hands held. People who are new to Marxist ideas. And I can tell you, as someone who is a Marx scholar, I've been working on Marx, reading about Marx, thinking about Marx, morning, noon, and night for many, many years.
Oh my God! Now
I
to my audience.
Turn to this edition to answer students' questions about what a particular word means that might just be a bit of an archaic turn of phrase, that might refer to some particular meeting that happened in some group,
When people shitpost in their chat, it lessens the possibility that we are going to get to provoke them with a thoughtful question in order to get them to say the quiet part out loud. I am extremely unhappy with what I'm seeing from Jason in the chat. I'm like, and he's been here long enough to know better. I've seen him do this in other places to it. I do not like it. I do not think it's productive. I think it makes all of us look foolish, and he should fucking know better. So the goal of this is to actually get information out of them. It's not to shitpost to own the libs.
writings. And for that reason, I often assign it to students. I find that sometimes scholars, academics, we can shy away from the manifesto a little bit precisely because of its user friendliness, precisely because of this perception that being the most accessible of Marx's writings, being the one that specifically is written in this extremely polemical and popular style, that somehow that is coming at the cost of an accurate and deep and nuanced presentation of Marx's theoretical insights. And I have not found this to be the case at all, whether it's in my own engagements with the manifesto in my work, or whether it is teaching the manifesto to students and using it as a tool to help them to understand how all of these disparate elements of Marx's extremely expansive theoretical system all hang together. Marx is in that German tradition of thinking about totality, and when he says totality, he means totality, right? And so to try to bring all those pieces together, this is really the place where that happens in an effective way that people can sink their teeth into. So one of the things that often surprises readers when they approach the manifesto is the sheer number of laudatory things that Marx has to say about capitalism and about the bourgeois class and about their role in history. I want to start with talking a bit about the bourgeoisie's character as a revolutionary class. This is a key element that distinguishes Marx's and Engels's theory from other kinds of socialist theory, other kinds of radical theories that may emphasize more of the negative, the immoral, the destructive elements of capitalism, all of which deserve to be emphasized, but which cannot be understood except in the context of the progressive role that capitalism plays in bringing about the possibility of communism. Capitalism is the absolute historical precondition for the full development of human capacities that Marx argues for in communist society.
So where in the evolution of the communist society, according to them?
With the capitalism's use of science and of materialism, at least historically, right? So one key feature of bourgeois theory and of the bourgeois mode of production at its inception, as opposed to the feudal society that it opposed and replaced unevenly, right?
Can someone please tell Jason if he doesn't cut the shit, he's going to get banned from my chat again?
Place to science and to materialism.
I'm banned from their chat.
Rationality, materialism, and a scientific worldview facilitated the major advances in production that laid the basis for the rise of the bourgeois class. When I'm explaining this to my students, I say, if you are trying to make advances in trade, you have to actually know how fast can a ship get from here to there. You need a process that is going to work the same way. It doesn't matter if you know him or not. Just say,
Carlin says if you don't cut the shit, she's banning you from her chat again.
Knowledge of material processes, right? So there were made these huge advances in humans' theoretical understanding of the world and humans' capacity to subordinate things in the world, right, to our ends. And they did that all within an ideology that
tell him specifically, Carlin is going to ban you when you come back over to her chat.
So
you don't cut
Marx
the shit.
And Engels write in the Communist Manifesto, quote, whereas past industrial classes depend on maintaining production unchanged, the bourgeoisie must constantly revolutionize production and therewith society, end quote. And it's capitalism and the need of the bourgeoisie to constantly change and revolutionize society that have in turn produced higher levels of human consciousness about our world and about society, making it possible for human beings to have a more accurate and scientific knowledge of our social existence than was possible in previous class societies. And in Marx's words, the bourgeoisie has removed what he calls the sentimental halo from relations of exploitation, and, quote, man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind, end quote. So although the interest in science remains an important part of bourgeois thought of how capitalist industries and capitalist idea production works today, it exists in a narrow and distorted form and takes a backseat to the class's historical need to compromise with those feudal forces and or to defend itself against working class challenges to its rule. The Enlightenment ideal, which held up science as a form of thought and practice in which the deepest and most fundamental questions could be answered through the work and intelligence of human beings, has given way to a conception of science as merely the art of manipulation, often divorced from a deeper inquiry into the nature of reality, or even divorced from the idea that such a deeper inquiry is even possible or desirable to engage in. But again, here too, I think it can be difficult at times looking at a world in which capitalism is clearly so ascendant, so overwhelmingly the water in which we swim. But it's important to consider the role of dialectics in allowing us to understand this reality. So of course, it's not just the bourgeoisie that plays a role in shaping our world, and it's not just bourgeois ideas that develop in response to the circumstances in which we exist. It's not a bourgeois ideology itself is not a form of consciousness that exists only among the bourgeoisie, right, or only among bourgeois theorists. And again, as Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto, quote, the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. Not only does the ruling class hold those ideas, but throughout the history of a class society, usually most of the people in that society hold the ideas of the ruling class. They're developed and promulgated by the ruling class in large part because they do bolster the reign of that class, and because the ruling class has the best infrastructure at its disposal to disseminate those ideas. But that alone would not be enough to ensure broad assent. In a capitalist society, bourgeois consciousness finds widespread acceptance, in large part because it actually does reflect and explain, if only in a distorted and limited manner, the world in which members of that society find themselves. The power of the capitalist class is in its capacity to transform the world so that the world as a material reality instantiates those conditions which most tend toward the flourishing of that class and towards the realization of its interests as a class. And so when we talk about what it means to say that this is, so Phil, when you mentioned that Marx uses the word bourgeois,
that's why we don't
bourgeois society, right? You know, it's important to talk about capitalism, but I think also putting those two ideas together, because when we think about bourgeois society, this is what it means, right? That the bourgeoisie calls the shots, and they are able to produce a world that in which that conduces towards their well-being and their advancement. And so as other people in other classes are interacting with that world and existing in that world, it's not surprising that as they develop a consciousness of that world, that consciousness is often bourgeois consciousness, right? Because it's consciousness of a bourgeois society. much about the real social relations in which human beings stand to one another under capitalism seems to confirm the ruling ideas of that society, which in turn provide an ideological bulwark for the maintenance of those social relations. And it's with this in mind that in the Communist Manifesto, Marx replies to the charges of an imagined bourgeois interlocutor. And Marx writes the following. He says, "Don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas
Bourgeois
are but the
notions of
outgrowth
freedom,
of the
culture, law.
conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class." We're at a moment
Why
right
they want to
now,
abolish
as
the courts.
Sabrina mentioned, where we're seeing this uptick in activism. I'm a professor at the George Washington University,
Told you,
which is
GW.
one of the universities in the U.S. where
I'm
we
a
have
savant.
a major encampment protest in solidarity with people in Palestine, and the students are calling for the US government to stop funding this genocide and calling for their universities. The students come from universities around the DC area, and they're calling for their universities to divest from corporations that profit from making and supplying weaponry and other kinds of technology that aid in the destruction of the Palestinian people. And
whiteness is capitalism.
I find in the kinds of conversations that I've been having about that, whether with students and peers or just with friends, with my parents, Palestine is an issue that for so long has been really in the US discussion relegated to the far left in terms of the political spectrum, and not brought out into the mainstream. And the fact that you have more mainstream discussion, and in that I include even some of the discussion taking place in mainstream capitalist newspapers and journals, where they're having to even consider the possibility that maybe not everyone who opposes Palestine is a crank, right? Or is some kind of anti-Semite or what have you, is a huge shift. It's a huge shift in the political conversation. And for that too, I'm put in mind of
it's
a process
not, you just don't know how to speak the language. This is not word salad.
And they describe how in moments of sharp political upheaval, people's minds get changed, right? And so now here they're talking about class conflict. We don't quite have open class conflict yet, right? But we have this passage from the manifesto where they say that finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the progress of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact, within the whole range of old society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class, the class that holds the future in its hands. Just as, therefore, at an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, so now a portion of the bourgeoisie goes over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeois ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole, right? And again, this notion
no, it's not. It is a different language. You don't know how to speak it.
The attempt at a
problem.
scientific, materialist, empirically grounded appraisal of reality is one that is going to make a communist out of you, right? You know, which is one of the reasons why there is such hostility to it, right? And to these kinds of scientific accountings. I want very quickly
No.
to just
Wrong.
speak to the question
Stick
of
around. We will
inevitability.
teach you what it is.
Often, this is a question people have about Marx. This idea
Literally-
that he thinks that it's just a foregone conclusion.
I literally stream far left trainings almost every single day of the week. You are welcome to come and join us, and we will teach you the language of socialist, because if you do not understand what she is saying, that means you do not understand the language of socialist. If you want to learn, you're going to have to come back more than once, and you can't expect me to do it in the middle of a live stream.
Manifesto, right? It's the place where he exhorts workers to revolution with assurances that they have a world to win, that they have only their chains to lose. It's the place where he writes that what the bourgeoisie produces above all is its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And it's easy to sort of hang on this word inevitable without noticing that what he's saying is that they're equally inevitable. The victory of the proletariat is as inevitable as the fall of the capitalist class. There are movements in history, there are things underfoot, there are developments occurring that make a socialist future possible, that lay down the groundwork for it. But whether or not that is a victory that is actually won depends entirely on our activity, on our organizing, on our theoretical development, and on our ability to keep revising and working towards a scientific, clear, objective, empirical, and well-supported and understanding of reality as possible. We can't retreat from that. So I want to conclude by saying that one of the things that makes Marx's analysis so distinctive and so powerful is precisely his identification of the revolutionary character of the bourgeoisie, because this is something they can't run away from. As much as they want to, they can't get away from it. They're a snake eating its own tail, right? They make their profits, they get their power through a proletariat, and through a revolutionary proletariat in particular. Try as they might, they can't escape.
We are literally watching a socialist book publisher talk about the Communist Manifesto. Of course, she's a full-blown Marxist. She is a professor at George Washington University.
Brotherhood of humanity realized in fact and as more than just an idle ethical phrase. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Vanessa and Sabrina, both for your excellent comments and observations and so on, insights into both the manifesto and the political period that we're in. And thanks, Vanessa.
Does anyone have questions they want asked
your
over
comments
there?
about this edition? When I was working on it, I mean, I had two main audiences in mind, and one of them were students like you. I've used the manifesto in the classroom and run into some of those same obstacles for people to understand, all those historical characters who get mentioned briefly, and you have to go chasing down to figure out who they were and why they're relevant and so on. So that was one of my audiences, and then the other is young activists who are getting political and wanting to find out more about Marx. And of course, those are two overlapping groups. Students who may come across Marx in the classroom, but they are also some of the people who are out there at the protests, who are combating.
They already are. They already have been for a while. I'm going to write a post about it on the Substack later.
For them, it's so apparent the glaring injustices in the world, and I'm glad that you both talked a little bit about the Palestine protests, which of course are so important right at this moment. That's why I've got the flag there in my background, just to remind us that that's one of the most urgent things which is happening, and it has so many negative aspects to it. The vast, the destruction, the genocide which is going on in Gaza. It's easy to get completely demoralized or depressed by that situation. But the fight back against it is what can give us hope, and that's taking place internationally. And right now, it's a high point in the U.S. with these campus occupations. It actually takes me back over 35 years to the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s, which I was involved with that, and it has a lot of similarities with students who we were building shanty towns back in the 1980s and making many similar demands about divestment and a radical change in U.S. foreign policy and so on. And I think that what you see is that in moments like this, people become open to, they're looking for an understanding about how the world works. And they want to understand, why is it that the U.S. government is so hypocritical and it's, always talking about democracy and human rights.
Peter, I'm sorry, they're not going to answer that.
And yet, when we look at his actual practice, it is the enemy of both of those things, or at least it brushes them aside whenever it's in its material interests to do that. So it gets them thinking about that bigger picture. And then it also connects up with the question of how do we change things. And Sabrina, I thought your comments were right on the mark there in terms of seeing the major capitalist interests which are at play, and also how we can exert pressure on that. And one of the things I think is very exciting about this current movement is that it is connecting up with the labor movement, both in the US and in other countries.
Because they're recruiting through the unions.
The weekend before last, I was at the Labor Notes conference in Chicago, and Palestine was a big topic for meetings and discussion there. I don't think there ever been meetings about Palestine at Labor Notes in the past. But now it clearly was one of the critical issues. It's motivating young activists in the labor movement and older ones as well. And for the first time, we've seen major unions actually make statements, not as strong as we would like, but it's a break in the right direction, which has come as a result of the activism. I think, and it's come as a result of the sheer brutality of what is going on in Gaza. Anyway, I think having the framework of the manifesto, you're not going to have the answers just by reading the manifesto about how we should organize today, or why the US is doing what it's doing, or why the global economy is working in the way that it does. But you've got a framework which gets you asking the right questions and looking in the right direction, I think. So this movement is another example of the way in which the insights of the manifesto
I asked
remain relevant.
Sorry, I didn't think you were over there.
For us today. I thought I'd just say one other thing to throw in there is the nature of the working class is constantly changing. I think where people are employed, how labor markets work. You have brief periods like the period I talked about in my opening comments of it during the post-war boom, when it seemed like there was stable employment and lifetime jobs and security, and that is the exception and not the rule under capitalism. It was not like that in Marx's day. In fact, there's a passage in the manifesto where they talk about how capitalist development is making
Sam.
Work more and more precarious.
Critically unwoke.
So that's not a new concept, the precarity of work. It's not, it's not something that people can look forward to today. One of the reasons why there has been this radicalization in many countries over the part. We have a polarization. There's a radicalization to the right, but there's also the very important radicalization to the left, and underlying that is the fact that capitalist development is not providing a decent existence, a secure existence for huge numbers of people, and
I'll speak to
that
this after the stream.
is a real big motivator for these political movements. So I'll pause there. I don't know if either of you wants to come in with some other thoughts, but really appreciated what you said, and I think the manifesto does give us this framework that is a I think essential starting point for understanding the way that the modern world works.
Starbright, how many times have I told you guys you will lose your business?
Can I just jump in real quick? So I spoke to students today who started a philosophy table at the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia encampment at the GWU campus. And I spoke to one young woman who said, yes, I just brought all my philosophy books and all my books about Marx and put them on a table, and people can come and read and talk about philosophy.
They're teaching Marxism in the encampment. That's great.
We need theory, right? I think one of the things that is so one of the things that I think is so important to understand is the way that rises in these sort of like rises in struggle also produce the possibility for theory, for education, things like teach-ins, syllabi, radical syllabi that people create, the conversations that happen when people are just sharing space with one another around a shared struggle. You might have a movement that starts out with just a point of common cause and then a whole lot of disagreement and confusion around it. But that is precisely what helps produce the space for people to work towards theoretical and political clarity with one another. And I think often there's a notion that the political clarity has to come first. The movement has to come fully spring forth from the head of Zeus with perfectly clear strategy, theory, and tactics. But oftentimes it is the creation of a movement and of a struggle that actually provides the space for that kind of education and theoretical advancement to come.
Oh, is that Ghost you bot? Yeah, that looks like bot.
You want to add anything, Sabrina? I think we have some questions as well. If
yay, questions!
Carlos wants to throw some of those out.
Let's do some questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, so
yeah,
I'll save myself for the answers.
Okay, yeah, we can go through some of the audience questions. So one that I really like, like this, we're celebrating the launch of this edition of the manifesto that, as Vanessa, talked through its relevance, and the entire sort of reason for today is about the relevance of the manifesto in today's sort of political landscape. But there's a question about are there any parts of the manifesto that maybe aren't relevant anymore, or that maybe we're off base? Obviously, we have the
question.
On our side, we have the ability to look back at 175 years of history, but yeah, is there any part of the manifesto that you look at today that maybe could use some updating, or maybe just the conditions just don't really make for that anymore? And then that could be up for anybody.
Can I jump in? on that one. Okay, because I this is something that we hear a lot. Like Vanessa mentioned that like there's this sentiment that pops out here and there in the manifesto. That's almost of an admiration for capitalism, right? So this is why it's always very important to contextualize why they're doing this in this particular way, why they're looking at production, why they're looking, because they're looking at the movement of history. But it's very easy to misinterpret that as way too much enthusiasm, and sometimes it's read as this Prometheanism, as we are going to dominate everything. And I believe that once you put the Communist Manifesto into context of the other things that Marx and Engels were developing, like Marx in the work around capital, or like Engels, even if you're looking like into certain things around like dialectics of nature and to Turing, you do understand that they understand limits. They just didn't get a chance to do this in this, political document that is a Communist Manifesto. So I always think that this is one of the places where I'm required to provide a little bit more context. So I'm not going to say that it's not relevant anymore, but sometimes like it's hard to see the way it aged when we're dealing with ecological crisis and overall destruction nowadays. So it's always very useful to bring in some context, perhaps from the volume 3 of Capital, or some things from dialectics of nature that help us understand that, in historical materialism, you do grasp material conditions and limits to material conditions, and you do grasp how capitalism is very mighty, but it's also destructive. So it's one of those passages that I try to contextualize.
Excellent question,
I'm actually curious to hear from Phil and Vanessa if they've had, like people just like coming out, because what I was mentioning about like the anti-communism discourse, something that anti-communists would come out and like put like messages online and try to confuse people is on the passage on the community of women, which I think is kind of funny, because the way that they're talking about the community of women is to actually dismantle what the anti-communists were trying to argue, right? That
what are you
talking like they're
about?
trying to dismantle this argument of like critics of communism, saying that even women will be socialized, even women will become collective property. And their point in that passage,
no one makes that argument.
Come out and
what are you talking about?
No, like women will actually not be property anymore, and they become property under the capitalist
literally
system
no one makes that argument.
But because it's a very like brief mention around gender, and this is something that's not really developed in the manifesto, I also find that something that tends to be taken out of context. So I wouldn't say that like things are not really relevant, at least in my opinion. I say that certain things nowadays, they require a little bit more context. That's why I think like the work of Phil and other authors and scholars are trying to piece things together, like actually say where this came from. This was part of a discussion that was relevant back then. A lot of things that happen and like in the Communist Manifesto, or like in the 18th of Brumaire, which is the other text that I worked on, they don't make sense to people if you don't are like making direct references. It's the same thing that like maybe like 10 years, 20 years, you could take a text that's like responding to a current debate today, that people don't know what the current debate is. They're not going to know why they're making reference to this in the first place. So I find that these are like two elements that I always have to contextualize for people when they're talking like what is bourgeois marriage and things like that.
Yeah, agree with that, Sabrina. It's worth remembering, Marx wrote the manifesto in a very short period of time. There'd been months of previous discussion with Engels, and Engels wrote two sort of preliminary drafts. One of them you mentioned earlier, the Principles of Communism. They're not bad, the things that Engels wrote, but they're rather, if you compare them in sort of literary quality, I mean, the manifesto just sort of lights up in comparison to those earlier writings. But Marx drew on some of that stuff. But then he had this deadline, and we have the letters coming from. He wrote this for the Communist League, which was a group of German emigres, German worker emigres in in France and England, and they wanted him to write this manifesto, and Marx often procrastinated, and in January 1848, the letters are being sent out. Where is it? You haven't written it yet. Marx was in Belgium at the time, and then he produced the thing in about 2 or 3 weeks, and it went to the publisher in February of 1848, and came out round about the same time as the 1848 revolutions in Europe were breaking out. Engels says it was published on the eve of the uprising in France. I don't think he means that literally, but round about that same time, which was late February 1848. Anyway, so you can just sort of imagine Marx writing this, staying up late, and he had a way with words, and there's just some brilliant phrases in the manifesto. We've quoted a few of them, but in some places he gets a little carried away. I think he looks at trends and just sort of extrapolates them. My favorite example, I'll quote it, is when he writes, "National divisions and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production, and to the conditions of life corresponding thereto." Well, I wish national
Don't do that,
divisions
please.
had just sort of
Don't do
vanished
that.
as a
Don't
result of
antagonize.
these economic developments, and there is a tendency in that way, in that international capitalism creates some of the the abilities for workers to have solidarity across national borders, but there are other tendencies at work as well, and in fact, the bourgeoisie uses nationalism in ways that you've mentioned as a crucial tool in trying to discipline and control the working class. Because if you see national interests as your primary, as a central part of your identity, then you're going to identify with your own rulers rather than with other workers in other countries. So there's this fight which goes on between internationalism and nationalism, and Marx kind of flattens that in that passage where he only talks about the trend towards against
the natural
national
world
national
is a state
division.
of communism.
So we know now it's much harder to overcome those. There's also a passage at the end of the first section in which he's talking about the divisions that the ruling class uses. Nationality is one of them, and he's pretty, well, maybe dismissive isn't quite the right word, but he gives you the idea that those divisions are easier to overcome than in practice they often are, just because the class struggle will sort of push past those divisions. And I think one of the things we've learned, or that we know more clearly now, is those divisions can run pretty deep, and you have to take them on explicitly. You can't just allow class interests and the fight for economic demands and so on you can't imagine that those things will just sort of override divisions of race and gender and nationality and so on. And particularly that is the case when the rulers of our society use those divisions very effectively to keep people separated. So you have to take that on as a central part of building unity. In other words, you can't be a reductionist about class. You can't think that because class is the underlying division in society, that it will simply override these other divisions. They have to be fought. They have to be analyzed. We have to have movements which take on those issues as well. So I think there's several places like that where it's not that Marx says something which you just have to sort of cross out, but you have to qualify it, or you have to elaborate and and develop these ideas. And of course, this is an early work as well. This was written in 1848, so Marx was writing for another 30, 35 years after this. And there's plenty in Marx and Engels' later writings, I think, which take on some of these issues as well. But as you'd expect from this early overview, not everything is exactly right. But it's so exciting to read it. At least once you understand the historical references and can get past some of the archaic language, it does give you a very exciting. It's not a dry historical analysis. It's a kind of riveting. There's a drum beat going on as it moves towards its crescendo. So those are some of my thoughts about some of the places where we would want to revise and update the manifesto.
I'm happy to speak to this as well. So I think so chapter 3 on socialist and communist literature, I don't think it's necessarily outdated, but I don't find myself having a lot of debates with French legitimists in my everyday, right? And so that is a chapter where we really have to do the work to unpack what is it that Marx was critiquing in the positions of these various political groups, and are there ways that either groups that exist today represent those same politics, or ways that the kinds of critiques that Marx is raising are ones that we can learn from in evaluating various kinds of political theory and strategy today. So it's not something that you're going to be able to sort of just apply directly. And I think more broadly, Marx is a lover of irony. I mean, the man loves an ironic turn of phrase. And if you're already in the swing, you're kind of speaking his language, then it becomes very beautiful, very funny, very engaging. But when you're brand new to it and everything he's saying sounds a little out there, then it's hard, I think, for new readers sometimes to distinguish between the wild thing he's saying that he believes and the wild thing he's saying that you're supposed to know is obviously wild and bananas and a thing you would never think, right? And so that just takes some time. It takes a tool like this one that is giving you some guideposts to help you understand the arguments that he's making. But I think his love of irony is both, and I'm influenced in this by a book by Brazilian Marxist literary theorist Ludovico Silva, and his book Marx's Literary Theory. So I'm influenced in this opinion by, I think, the very good arguments made in that book. But Marx's irony is both a stylistic flourish and an attempt to show that things are their opposites in good dialectical fashion, right? Something appears one way on the surface, but you investigate that concept, you investigate that reality a bit further, and you find that actually it is its own opposite, it contains its own negation. I think, so I saw there's a question about Marx on the family.
Yeah!
And he takes the imagined bourgeois interlocutor who is charging the communists with abolishing the family. And Marx responds, you already abolished it. It's already gone. The family, and Marx, we know, was a family man, loved his kids.
That's not what it says.
Loved to be home with the wife,
That's
the
literally
kids and all
not
that.
what it says.
He has no particular antipathy towards family life, quite the opposite. But his aim there is to show that as a social reality, working class people already have no time to spend at home. They have no time to spend on those types of personal
Murphy, stop
relations.
shitposting.
And that therefore, this is already negated within capitalist society. And what communism has to offer is what I might, in a Hegelian turn of phrase, call the negation of that negation, which would be the actual ability of human beings to have those kinds of social, loving, comforting, and free relationships with one another that tend towards their mutual flourishing.
That's not what the Communist Manifesto says, for the record.
Thank you so much
In
for
any
that.
way.
So we probably have time for maybe one more question, and then maybe if the panel wants to do like a quick round of a couple minutes each for some final thoughts. But yeah, I think, I think as Sabrina mentioned, like kind of looking at some of like the later works of Marx, like Capital, that kind of laid the foundation for a lot of sort of arguments around eco-socialism and the disruption of nature and nature and humanity. I think, talked about some of the way, like Phil talked about some of the way in which some of the later works kind of added more context. There's another question about, like left scholars talk about racial slavery and racism to be sort of like a central component of capitalist exploitation, of oppression, yet Marx doesn't really take on the question of race in the Communist Manifesto as such. And if we on the left think that that's a problem, what is one way that we can go about solving that? Maybe like looking at some others. I think that's also one thing that I'll chime in and say as well, that if folks can say more about it. But like socialism, Marxism, that didn't end with Marx. Just as later works of Marx expanded on these, there's many scholars from all over the world that have also taken on these questions and have expanded on it and adjusted them to the world around us. So just to say that. But yeah, I'll throw that question out there about sort of the question of racial capitalism, slavery,
what is
race,
the definition
and
of racial capitalism?
And whoever wants to take that on.
Who wants to define?
Well, I mean, Marx writes much more about this in Capital than in the Communist Manifesto. I mean, the Communist Manifesto does have a fairly narrow vision in its historical account. It's talking about what happened internally in Europe, leading to the bourgeois revolutions. And no, he doesn't talk about how essential slavery and pillaging of the the colonial world was an essential part of the development of early capitalism. He does address that in Capital itself, and Capital is a much more difficult book to read. But the final part 8, the final part of it is about the history of capitalism, and it goes into this in much greater detail. So that's what I would recommend. If you want to read what other things that Marx has to write about race and capitalism and the role of slavery and pillage of the new world, that is addressed in that section. And yes, Carlos, many people have taken this much further. So I don't think it contradicts what he writes in the manifesto, but it's a missing piece, if you like, that he has more to say about later.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I would echo Phil's observation that the Communist Manifesto is a document that simultaneously gives us a lot of insight into Marx's theoretical framework, but is at the same time a political document written at a particular historical moment toward a particular end. So I find that that Marx generally had much more to say, actually, about slavery and especially about the transatlantic slave trade than he's generally supposed by many to have said. So there's the famous line labor in white skin cannot emancipate itself where the black skin is branded. We have Marx, who one of his side hustles was writing articles for U.S. newspapers, and he wrote an open letter to Abraham Lincoln, an open letters to the American to white American workers, specifically about the Civil War. And the importance of the emancipation of slaves in the U.S. I think that there is a long and sordid history, at least in the U.S. context in particular, of driving a wedge between socialist activism and socialist organizing and anti-racist activism and anti-racist organizing. And I guess if I were a member of the ruling class trying to keep my hands on the reins of society, I would drive that wedge pretty deep too, because that is a combination that is of working class activism and Black liberation struggle that historically has driven some of the most important and radical movements in U.S. history. Now, and I also will echo Phil's comment that it's extremely important to not end our discussion of Marxist theory with Marx. Oftentimes, the idea that Marxist theory has little to say about race proceeds by actually perpetrating the very same erasure that it claims to call out, namely by just not reading Black Marxists. And so reading people like Claudia Jones, Angela Davis, W.B. Du Bois, Claude Lightfoot, his Racism and Human Survival, I think is quite good. There's all kinds of work written from different perspectives. I don't agree with everything that any of the figures I just named has to say, but I think that that's exactly the work of activists and scholars to bring those ideas out into the forefront, so that the necessary interconnections between these struggles can be brought to the fore and can be better understood.
If I could add a couple of things on that, I think we always have to warn ourselves against the tendency of wanting an author or a big reference of ours to exhaust everything, to cover all of the topics. We need to understand that Marx was very prolific, actually. Like, he would try to dabble into geology, natural sciences, and go back to a bunch of authors reading in different languages. And he was probably more productive than most of us in our lifetime, considering also all of his family difficulties, political difficulties, his illnesses, and things like that. But he was also at the same time trying to found the methodology, a particular way of looking to reality. So that was already a very big job. So he tried to reach into a lot of things, and when we're looking to his letters, these other articles that he used to write, like Vanessa mentioned, his drafts and manuscripts and notes everywhere. He did mention a lot of things, but I think it would be kind of unfair to ask for him and Engels together to absolutely put everything together and to sew everything together. When in fact, one of the calls behind communist thinking is for collective work, is for getting debate flowing, getting more people to join hands and bringing more data as well. The Marxist method is profoundly empirical. So he was dealing with a particular context. He was also responding to some of the debates at the time. So the polemics that were more famous at the time, this necessity, like we have nowadays, to perhaps respond to a really bad pundit. And sometimes it's even a waste of our time. We could devoting our time to better data and how to explain things, but we still have to answer the pundit every now and then. We know that in fact, during writing Capital Volume 1, because Marx was so dedicated to, the critique of political economy, that sometimes Engels got the job having to reply to the pundit. So they were trying to do a lot of different things at the same time. And I think there's a difference between having a fundamentally wrong analysis and having an incomplete analysis of things. So obviously there's like incomplete analysis, and this is our job. It's a job of people who came before us, what we're doing now, people who are still going to come after us, trying to complement this. And we know that, some of these debates are still very lively, like the debates around, labor theory of value, the debates around like how we're dealing with the essence of what is labor, what is the workforce, now that we're in this age of artificial intelligence, now that we're in this age of multiple types of exploitation, what this means in terms of the renewal of imperialist dynamics. So it is very lively, and it is our job to say that if something was not covered, we need to look into why it was not covered, but do our jobs in trying to cover it, precisely because there is a tendency a lot in political circles of expecting too much for everyone, so we can just kind of put people into a pedestal. And I think that, like, one of the things that we always try to emphasize is that with the Communist Manifesto, we have one of these incredible foundational texts. It tells a lot about reality, and it does not tell about other elements of reality, but we look into it and then we'll build from it into other kind of things, because what we're doing here is not religion. And even in religion, you're going to have, debates about theology. So if we're not doing religion here, then we're going to have even more debates, even more hard work to try to complement, bring in new things. There are challenges that we face today. There are new, and they're going to require us to be creative and to like question ourselves as we're doing that.
Thank you all so much. So before we wrap up, we'll do one last quick kind of go around with some final thoughts. We'll go in reverse order from when we started. So we'll have Vanessa, followed by Sabrina, and then Phil. We'll let you have the last word. But before I kick it off to Vanessa, I just wanted to give one last plug for this edition of the Communist Manifesto, available at haymarketbooks.org. And yeah, thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I'll let you go ahead, Vanessa.
So I wanted to recommend the book Marx at the Margins by Kevin Anderson. It is, to my awareness, certainly the most exhaustive look at Marx's writings on areas outside of Europe, right? And his ideas about race, colonialism, ethnicity, and so on. I don't want to sort of like launder Marx either. I mean, Marx at various times, like you can find in his letters him vocally opposing slavery, and you can also find him using racist phrases in some of his letters. And so I want to be honest about that as well. But I think it really does go to that question that Sabrina raised of, is the thing that we have here a faulty theory, a bad theory, or is it an incomplete theory that requires further elucidation? But specifically the question of what did Marx say about race, that's one text that folks might find useful. And other than that, I just want to thank my co-panelists. I thought this was a wonderful discussion, and I just want to make a last plug for grabbing a copy of this second edition of the manifesto. I know that it feels like things are kind of coming full circle a bit in terms of students wanting the electronic versions versus really wanting like paper, wanting something that they can sit together with, that they can physically bring to a protest. They want these things. And so we're just really fortunate to have them. Thank you.
All right. Hang on. That music gets me Every damn time. Well, guys, that wraps up the Haymarket Books presentation for today. Now, just a couple of super chats that I want to, not super chats, just normal chats. First off, I want to say, like, I understand people want to have fun on the internet. I really do get it. However, when you are regularly in my chat, and then you go over to a socialist chat that we are literally streaming, and it's not hard for them to connect the dots where this is coming from. You are a poor representation on me when you shitpost in their chat, particularly when I have said, please don't do this. The purpose of this exercise is not to own the libs. If you want to own the libs, then there are any number of low IQ places that you can go to. Libs of TikTok will love you. The Daily Wire will love you. The Blaze will love you. There are many commentators on the internet that will lick that shit up with a spoon. That's not our purpose. Our purpose in doing this is to get good questions in to provoke them to say the quiet part out loud. That is the point. We want to provoke them so they then say things on the video. And every time there are people that go over their shit posting, they make it less likely that we are going to get an opportunity to provoke them to get them to say something on video. And I'm really kind of resentful of the fact that I even need to lecture people about this, because I feel like I've been like, if you're going to shitpost, create a new fucking account and do it under a name that is not associated with anyone in my chat. And keep in mind that even if you do that, they can shut off the chat at any time. They can refuse to answer questions. They're just going to ban your account anyway. It's not a productive use of time. I don't want to see it. It quite frankly makes me embarrassed, and it makes me feel like you're not taking this seriously at all. Because if you were taking it seriously at all, you would know that this is not the time and the place for shit posting. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. I thought there were a few good quotes that we got in that, but there really wasn't much that was exciting, if we're honest about it. I think that, and again, this goes back to the shit posting too. When they know that people are in the chat just being antagonistic towards them, does that create an environment where they can say the quiet part out loud? No. If they know that there are a bunch of people shit posting in the chat, they're going to be more guarded with their words and more careful about what they say. That was a live presentation. It wasn't pre-recorded. So it's not like they couldn't change what they were going to say. Anyway, so really not much got said, and I wonder if we would have gotten more if there wasn't so much shit posting from people from my community, which I expressly asked you not to do. Anyway, a couple quick things. Hobbit, I don't know how to say your name. I apologize. So how to decompress after hearing so much of this. After a few weeks of watching with you all, I fear it's making too much sense to me. That is a natural point that you're going to experience when you start getting into watching socialism with us. And I guess I would just say it's okay to take breaks. This stuff watching socialism will literally drive you insane if you allow it to. Look at what it's done to James Lindsay. James Lindsay doesn't know what the fuck's going on anymore. He is so into the internet and into his specific thing where he's just cherry picking things that reinforce his point of view. He has no goddamn idea what's going on anymore in the world because he consumed too much of this stuff and it consumed him in return. So if you're new to watching socialism with me and maybe you've been coming back for a few weeks and you're starting to kind of get it, because after a couple weeks of watching socialism, you start to realize how much you didn't know. You start to realize how many people have lied to you. You start to realize like what's actually going on, which is far scarier than anything the conservative influencers are telling you. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to lean on people in the chat for support because it can be quite a mind fuck. And I want to acknowledge that. So You know, we will be here. I will continue to do this 6 days a week because I have tortured myself to a place where I know how to do this. I also want to thank Kilted Coachman, who has been keeping me apprised of what is going on the protests. And there's something I actually want to highlight because just the other day, actually, it may have even been yesterday. It was either yesterday or the day before. I tweeted something to the effect of, and I think I actually said this a week ago too. I think that Kent State 2.0 is going to happen in Florida because Ron DeSantis is going to do something stupid because Ron DeSantis wants to look like the big tough man. No one's going to protest in the state of Florida, which isn't true, by the way. The Kilted Coachman just alerted me to another protest on another Florida college campus. Every time they call out the police, the kids just come back or they set up somewhere else. And it's just like, calling the police is the wrong thing to do on any number of levels because it just actually makes things worse. I know why people think it's the right thing to do, but it just makes things worse. Anyway, it seems as though Ron DeSantis has decided it would be a good idea to tear gas people. Now, where have I seen this before? Where have I seen an instance where protesters, for expressing speech and expressing points of view that people didn't like, where have I seen an instance before of protesters getting tear gassed? Oh, that's funny you mentioned that, Reagan, because I remember that when I was at January 6th at the Capitol, I not only got tear gassed, and I wasn't doing anything. I was standing around on a lawn. Not only did I get tear gassed, but the guy standing directly in front of me got hit in the head with the tear gas canister. So it wasn't like not only did I get tear gassed, I got tear gassed literally the thing landing like right in front of me and nailing a guy on the head, and he fell down and he was bleeding from his head, and I had to drop to the ground and cover up my face with everything I could. So I have a little bit of experience with protesters being tear gassed for speech that someone didn't like. And so I clicked into the article and I was like, maybe they were being violent. Maybe they look at the video. We've got the video right here. Maybe they were being violent and that is why they were tear gassed. But to me, it doesn't look like they were being violent at all. To me, it looks like they were standing around in a circle. They weren't, I mean, let's just watch this video. We're not going to put the sound on, but let's just watch it. Oh shit, I can't do that. Hang on. I'm going to make it bigger so you guys can see it. Maybe they were just being violent, but no. No. I guess I can play the sound now. I don't know if there's any sound though. There they are, standing around, expressing opinions that they don't like. They've made like, oh, and they start shooting tear gas at them. They throw it back. They didn't even throw it back at the cops. And even still, no one's being violent, no one's running, no one's doing anything aggressive. They're literally just like standing there. And now they're trying to disperse to get away from the tear gas. Are we really in the business, conservatives, of saying that people with opinions that you don't like should be tear gassed? And by the way, let's read this article. Hang on. It gets even better. It gets better than the tear gas. 6 people were detained as tear gas was deployed against the protesters at the University of South Florida Tuesday afternoon after law enforcement declared it an unlawful assembly. So students were sitting around on the lawn saying words you didn't like. You declared that an unlawful assembly and tear gassed them. at a public university. Students at the University of South Florida lined up Tuesday afternoon with umbrella shields. Video of Eagle 8 HD showed a group standing together in a circle with arms locked. At 4:50 p.m., law enforcement officers told protesters they had 15 minutes to leave or else be subjected to tear gas and rubber bullets. They were going to shoot them with rubber bullets for sitting on a lawn saying words they didn't like. There aren't even any tents set up. What rules were these kids breaking? And listen, you don't have to agree with someone's speech. Like, this is literally what the First Amendment is about, assholes. And by assholes, I mean Ron DeSantis and Zionist conservatives who think this is acceptable. The whole point of the First Amendment is that people get to say things that you don't like. If you then use the power of the state to tear gas and shoot rubber bullets at people for sitting on a lawn saying words you don't like, you are the bad guy. And this is like one step away from Kent State. You're really going to tell me that as protests keep happening in Florida, because this shit isn't going to stop anything, it's just going to piss people off. You're really telling me that Ron DeSantis is going to be able to resist his urge to really make that national statement that if you dare protest in Florida, like you're going to get the Florida State like National Guard called out on you, and then someone's going to throw a rock, and then someone's going to get shot, and then we have Kent State 2.0, because this is what they want, guys. This is what they want. You know, I reposted something on my Twitter account earlier today from Kyle Becker, who I really do like quite a bit, actually. Kyle was talking about the protests at Columbia last night. Hang on. Not that. Here. Kyle was showing, well, I'm not even going to call this a protest. This was a riot at Columbia last night. Like Columbia has jumped the goddamn shark. The minute that you take over a building and like start hanging banners, and they like Columbia University is turning into Evergreen State 2.0 now, which I think we all knew was inevitable, but that's actually not my point. So remember back when the Columbia protests started, it actually wasn't that many people. And then the university made the boneheaded mistake of allowing the NYPD on campus. Okay. This was a big deal. For people who don't understand why this is a big deal, this was the first time that the NYPD had been let on campus at Columbia since 1968. The left hates the cops. The left wants to abolish the police. They want to defund the police. They want to get rid of the prison industrial complex. The left thinks that the cops are the managers of private property. They support capitalism. That's their very reason for existence. The left believes that when they institute their Marxist utopia, there won't be any need for cops because everyone will have access to everything they need, and therefore cops won't need to exist. This is why you're seeing things be decriminalized all over the country. This is why you're seeing the abolish the police stuff. All that comes from the far left. So there is no greater crime that you can commit to the left than calling the New York City Police Department on this, when at that time, the kids at Columbia were literally just sitting on the lawn, okay? They really weren't doing anything. Then they had the police called on them, and the minute that they had the police called on them, what was a rather small kind of contained protest quadrupled in size. The next day, it quadrupled in size, all because Columbia had the police called on them. Now, a lot of people have been asking me in the last week, they said, what would you do, Carlin, if you were at Columbia? And my answer has been, I wouldn't have called the cops in the goddamn first place. That was their biggest mistake, allowing the NYPD on campus in the goddamn first place. What they should have done is ignore the students, let them set up their little encampment, let them have their protests, ignore them, not feed them attention, not do any of that, and just allow them to do their thing and allow it to pit her out, because that's exactly what would have happened, guys. The students have been protesting for months. This escalated because Columbia made the strategic blunder of calling the NYPD, because they didn't fully understand the impact of calling the NYPD on these students, because they didn't understand the history and they didn't understand the ideology. The NYPD is what made this worse. Now, conservatives are about to get all confused by this. How can the police make things worse? Because they wanted to get arrested. They wanted to be martyred. That was the fucking goal. They wanted the confrontation with the police because they knew that if they had the confrontation with the police, and that's what happened. That is exactly what happened. The very next day, things kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more out of hand, all because they called the police. Now, yesterday, Columbia made another strategic blunder in which they sent the students a letter at 10 a.m. saying, if you don't get off our property, you're going to be suspended. Why was that a strategic blunder? Because the university had no way of enforcing it. It kind of seems, and this is the general sentiment that I heard on a live stream that's actually inside the encampment, and they've been living in the encampment for like 2 weeks. The general sentiment on the part of the students was the reason that Columbia sent that letter is they thought that the students were tired and they were over it and they were ready to kind of pack things up and go home, because some people had been leaving because it's the end of the semester and all that, and the numbers at the protest have been dropping. And so the administration thought it was a good time. Okay, the kids are tired now. They don't want to do this anymore. Let's give them an ultimatum and let's give them a way to kind of like back out of this so that they can still graduate and stuff like that. Well, they didn't have any way to really get the students off of campus. They didn't have any sort of like, private like security. They didn't anticipate that their faculty were going to go and defend the students. They didn't think about like, do we how do we handle this situation if the students tell us no? I promise you there was no thought put into this at all, because I worked in higher ed for a really long time and I know how they think. And they're stupid a lot of the times. So what did the students do? The students were like, fuck you. And for your trouble, and the students actually said this. The students literally posted this on their Instagram account. I have the screenshots on my Twitter if you want to see them. The students literally said that the reason that they took over that building last night was because the administration escalated against them. And so the taking over of the building was retribution against the administration. Again, because the administration had no plan on how to deal with these people effectively. So now the situation has been escalated again. But I want to explain why I think it was a good thing that the NYPD was kept away last night. Now, if the university had come up with a strategic plan to kind of like clear the area quickly and effectively, like in midday, maybe that would have been okay. But Columbia really just expected the students to give up. And that's the problem, because the minute that Columbia doubled down, the students doubled down. And so my argument is that I understand why people are saying the cops should have been called last night. Number one, that you got to understand, the faculty have turned completely against the university at this point. And if the university calls the cops, not only are they going to piss off the students, because remember, before this protest, the New York Police Department had not been allowed on Columbia's campus since 1968. So not only did that piss off the students, it also pissed off the faculty. So now the faculty are completely on side of the students. The faculty have set up a whole security squad to protect the students. So now if you call the police, you have like the majority of the student and faculty, and I promise you the staff population too, that's not going to be on your side. And then that shit's going to explode real quick. But my bigger point is this. You have to remember that goals mean something. The goal that the students at Columbia have, and I would argue at many of the other protests as well, but I absolutely believe there are martyrs. There are wannabe martyrs at Columbia. They're literally honoring martyrs in the protest. You think they don't want to be martyrs themselves? The majority of the students that are involved want this to be another Kent state. They want someone to get shot. If the police had been called last night, as they were all riled up, moving furniture around, breaking windows, trying to take over this building, do you know what would have happened? People would have started throwing rocks or other things, and some police officer, because they're not the brightest crayon on the box, is going to pull out their gun and shoot the fucking student. And they may even shoot more than one of them. Maybe they would have just shot indiscriminately into the crowded mob, because the students are going to try to protect each other because that's what they do. If Columbia had called the cops last night, I promise you, there would have been a second Kent state, which is exactly what they want. The students wanted to provoke that. Now, I don't know what the solution is to this problem anymore, because Columbia has just effed this up over and over and over and over and over again. But I do know that the answer is not actually necessarily as simple as removing the president of Columbia and putting someone else in her place, because the strategies that I've seen online for this are actually even worse than what Columbia is doing right now. Everyone calling for the cops and the National Guard, you're literally going to provoke what the students want, which is the next Kent state. And if you provoke the next Kent state, that's... The protests will be everywhere, on every college campus, in every city, all goddamn summer. And when they leave college, they're just, if they have to go home to a different city or a different state than they go to school, you know what they're going to do? They're going to find places to protest there. Do you guys want another summer of love? Do you want this? Because that's exactly what's going to happen. These students have been protesting for months. This has been escalating for months. This is not the same as 2020, by the way. This is not the same at all. Because 2020, it wasn't escalating for months. This has been escalating since October 7th. The students are pissed. To be honest, the students are actually on the side of righteousness in terms of like the Palestinian issue. So it's actually much more severe even than Black Lives Matter. And you're telling me that calling the cops on them would have been a good idea? No. Someone would have gotten shot, and that would have been the ball game. So I don't know what Columbia's path out of this is, other than, quite frankly, to weather the storm, or to try to find a way to give the students what they want so they cut the shit. Which normally I would say you never negotiate with the left, but Columbia has really done fuck things up, and that is their fault. That is, when you make your bed, you fucking lie in it, and you sometimes have to eat a ton of shit when you screw things up this epically badly. What I would have said to Columbia at the beginning, again, ignore the protesters, let them set up their tents, maybe try to direct them to the least inconvenient place. Just ignore them. Don't call the police. Don't do it. But Columbia called the police, and here we are. So that's kind of what I think about that. Anyway, guys, I have another show in about 2.5 hours because Joshua is back tonight for Nothing Remotely Controversial. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to do our show at 9:30 tonight. And again, I've got a bunch of stuff I need to post on the Substack between now and then. So if you guys want to be the first to get the updates, head over to my Substack, Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. Sign up for free email updates, or if you want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business. And quite frankly, like, the more supporters I get now, the more protest coverage I'm going to be able to do, because like it would really help me out if people could free up my time to do more protest coverage, because there's a lot of stuff I want to do with that. Anyway, that's entirely up to you guys. You can head over to the Substack, sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year. And when you sign up to support my work, you buy my time researching this stuff, finding primary source documentation, breaking it down, explaining it, producing the content, all that good stuff. I'm going to go take a little bit of a break, and I will be back at 9:30 tonight with Joshua, who I know you all love way more than me. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.